Happy Easter Sunday! My name is Kristen Farrell and I'm the Guest Services Coordinator here at the chapel. We are so glad that you've chosen to worship with us on this Easter Sunday. If this is your first time here or if you haven't gotten connected yet, you can text Chapel Guest to 94,000, fill out the Connect form, and we would love to meet you. If you've never visited one of our 2 on-site locations, we would like to invite you to come and check one out. If you have kids, our Next Gen ministry is for you. Registration is open for our summer opportunities for elementary age kids as well as middle and high schoolers. Visit our Next Gen page online for more details. If you have any questions throughout the service, you can message us on Facebook or through our website. Or you can email us at connect@thechapelbr.com. We'll get back with you as soon as we can. Now let's continue in our service.
Happy Easter, and thanks so much for joining us. We're here to celebrate with Christians around the world that Jesus has risen from the dead. This is one of those Sundays in the church where everyone knows what we're supposed to talk about. Even people that don't go to church have heard the story. Even if this is your first time to join us, you have some idea of what we're going to talk about. 2,000 years ago, a man named Jesus rose from the dead. He was a great teacher, a miracle worker, a healer, a prophet. And to some, a rebel leading people astray. To others, he was the promised Messiah who had come. But to those in power at the time he was on earth, he was a troublemaker, and they killed him. But 3 days later, he rose from the dead. The tomb was empty, and he appeared to many people, and actually, from that point on, would forever change the world. That proved His resurrection proved that he was more than all those things people thought about him. You know, when a guy says he's going to die and then come back from the dead and then does it, that's a guy you need to believe in. So we're here to celebrate the resurrection. We're here to talk about how Jesus rose from the dead. And I know that even though you've heard the story, or at least know the story generally, there's probably some different thoughts about resurrection. For some, maybe you think it's a symbol of something that you're supposed to learn from Jesus, maybe a new beginning theme. For some, maybe it's the legend, something that had some truth at some point but has changed throughout history. For some, maybe you feel like it's a complete hoax, something a church or institutionalized religion has used to control people throughout history. Or maybe it's something we tell ourselves to feel better. For many, however, I believe it's a historical fact that Jesus is really God and he did really rise from the dead, physically and historically. And this changes everything. But even for us who do believe, I think that we can all admit that sometimes through our worldview, we have a hard time believing because maybe science has seemingly explained away the miraculous. So we're going to look at the resurrection from the perspective of Mary Magdalene. Something transcendent happened here. Big word. Something beyond our ability to perceive. Something miraculous. A power from outside of our daily lives has come in and affected our life. Something outside of our daily lives that we can't see is impacting us. Now, while we may not believe in the miraculous, we often daily engage with things we cannot say. Let me give you an example. Just think, if you would, for a minute, consider radio waves, that we use with our cell phone. They're electronic radiation. at a very high frequency. We can't see them. We can't see the waves or perceive them with our senses. We definitely can't hear them. But if we look at our phone, it will tell us if there are any, right? Here's a symbol. Man, we all know what this symbol means, don't we? It's a symbol of, is there a cell signal and what is its strength? And when that symbol's gone, man, we're looking for it if we're needing to make a phone call from a cell phone. Here's another symbol that we all can relate to. I call it the Wi-Fi wedge, and it tells us if there is a Wi-Fi signal, another radio signal, and how strong it is. Even though we can't see the waves are there, we can't see them, but they're there, those waves transcend our senses. God's actions transcend our understanding, right? Transcendence means it's beyond the range of physical and human experience or understanding. I'll say it this way. Because for many years now, we've had many years of science and technology and research and accumulated a lot of knowledge, we can begin to explain more things and how they operate and what's going on than ever in history. And because of this, many people have moved away from religion, thinking that religion is just how people who didn't know what we know try to explain things in their world. And today, we actually know better. That's how some people think. Have you ever felt that way? Many people, even people of faith, have felt that way because we live in such a modern world. Now, there is something very important that relates to this big idea that is actually played out in our story, in our life today. It represents something we all long for, something we all desire, something that drives much of what we do and what we think about, something that, whether you believe in that Jesus rose from the dead or not, you want in your life. And it's another big word, imminence. It's the idea of what is right there with you. It can refer to being known, being intimate, like a good friend who's right there with you when you need them. Let me illustrate it. When I was a child, I often suffered from croup. It's an infection of the upper airway, which gets constrained and narrowed, making it hard to believe, and it's really scary for a child and for a parent. And actually, I would have to be hospitalized for it. Today, they can treat it with something that just covers the child's nose and mouth to help them breathe. But when I was a kid, they took me to the hospital and they set up a little plastic see-through tent around my head and upper chest. And after I was stabilized and awake, I wanted what every child wants when they're in the hospital, their parents. We want them near us, right? We want them with us. We want people we know. We want imminence. That's what we want. And more than just being present, we want to be known. We want to be seen. We want to be loved and accepted. These are longings deep in every human, no matter where you are on the planet. We want someone to celebrate us, to praise our accomplishment, to be there when we need them. And what does this have to do with resurrection? What does this have to do with transcendence? Actually, everything. Everything. I want to read from John's account of the resurrection. It's in John chapter 20, verses 1 to 18. And here's what it says. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb, both running. But the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying, but he didn't go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple, who reached the tomb first, went inside. He saw and believed. Now, they did not understand from the scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. When the disciples went back to where they were staying, now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over and looked into the tomb. and she saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, at the head and one at the feet. And they said to her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They've taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they've put him." At this, she turned around and she saw Jesus standing there. But she did not realize it was Jesus. And he asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you're looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." And Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father, to your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. Wow, what an unbelievable story. Now, I want to look at the resurrection story through the eyes of Mary Magdalene. See, in her story, we see the intersection of the immanent and the transcendent. We see not only that what the resurrection means, we see what it means for her and what it could mean for us. Now, who is Mary Magdalene? Well, she's a unique person, of much of which is assumed and very little is actually known. But there is enough said about her to get a good picture. There's no need, as others have done over the centuries, to attribute to her the sins, particularly sexual sins. The most famous person to do this was Pope Gregory the Great, who saw Mary as many, if not all, of the unnamed women and some of the other Marys in Jesus' ministry. In AD 591, for example, he said, "She whom Luke calls the sinful woman, whom John calls Mary of Bethany, we believe to be Mary from whom 7 devils were ejected, that is Mary Magdalene, according to Mark." Now, this is not true. This is not an accurate reading of what we know in the Bible. So what do we know about her? Well, she's exceptional. She was a faithful follower of Jesus. She was at the foot of the cross when Jesus died. She didn't deny him, and she didn't flee from him, as many of the other disciples did. And all 4 gospel accounts of the resurrection, she is at the tomb. The most repeated and undisputed facts about her are 2. First, where she's from, Magdala. Now, while the exact location is unknown, it's on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee. The second and most defining words about her are that she was possessed by 7 demons that Jesus cast out of her. Now, why is that important? Well, in our therapeutic age, we have moved away from people having spiritual issues to people having sicknesses or emotional struggles. Now, granted, we have gained a tremendous medical insight into how the brain works and the psychology of how a person is impacted by trauma, by early childhood development and the events in their life. But I think we've gone too far. We have excluded what even recent generations saw as spiritual problems that deal with evil and dark spiritual forces. Now, I don't want to assume that the description of Mary's demonic oppression was simply an ancient attempt to explain what we now understand to be purely medical. I don't want to do this for a couple of reasons, and they're important. First, if we do this, we deny the ministry of Jesus and really the biblical account of his miraculous work. Could you consider that we've become so humanistic, so secular in our understanding of the world, our worldview, that we've excluded an important spiritual reality? Is there room for the modern follower of Jesus to consider this? Because I know many are deeply challenged by the modern age, the age of disenchantment that has closed off any external forces that might intrude into life. But the Bible tells a very different story. Now, and let's be clear, not every sickness is spiritual and not every debilitating mental illness is demonic. Luke, who wrote the Gospel of Luke, is a doctor. And he makes this clear. Now, while he doesn't have the medical knowledge that's been accumulated over 2,000 years, he was smart enough and observant enough to differentiate between Jesus' healings of physical sickness, of mental sickness and illness, and spiritual oppression. He even described it and summarized it in Jesus' activity. In Luke 7:21, it says this, "At this very time, Jesus cured many people of sicknesses, physical, diseases, also called tremors, mental, and of evil spirits. And he gave sight to the blind." So right there, he delineates these. Well, why is this important? Well, because first, what Mary experienced in her own life was a transcendent miracle. Right? And isn't that exactly what the resurrection is? A transcendent miracle? Well, the Bible doesn't tell us what those 7 demons were, how they tormented her or oppressed her, but reading the New Testament, you kind of get an idea. Let's just say this. She had lost control of herself. She wasn't out of her mind. She was out of control and being controlled by forces that were seeking to destroy her. Why do I say it that way? Because Jesus told his disciples the goal of the devil and dark forces, it's not just to weaken a person, it's to destroy them. And he compared the devil activity to his own in John 10:10. He said this, "The thief," speaking of the devil, "comes to only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that you may have life and have it to the full." Mary's life was changed. Like so many who had been touched by Jesus and come to faith in him. I think about the woman who was sick for 12 years and spent all of 12 years. She was sick for 12 years. She spent all of her money on doctors that couldn't help her. And she said, if I can just touch the edge of Jesus' clothes, I believe that he can and that he will help me. And that's exactly what Jesus did. See, Mary was so changed by Jesus that she was ever present. She was always with him, wanting to be with him. She was the first at the tomb. In her grief, she was totally confused. And as she was crying and confused at the tomb, it says in verse 11, she stood outside the tomb crying. And she wept and she bent over and looked into the tomb. And even though she had experienced powerful transcendent spiritual transformation herself, she wasn't thinking about a spiritual solution, a miraculous solution for the tragedy before her. Jesus had just raised Lazarus from the dead a few days ago, about a week ago in Bethany. Who was going to raise him from the dead? She concluded that someone had taken the body. Verses 12 and 13. And she saw 2 angels in white seated where Jesus' body was, one at the head and the other at the foot. And and they asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they've put him." How often, when something goes missing, do you assume someone took it? And here's the thing, the more valuable the thing that is missing is, the more valuable that thing that is lost is, the more prone we are to consider theft, whether it's a sibling taking a toy or somebody taking something valuable. And this is the thing you need to know. Jesus was extremely valuable to Mary. Look what happened next. At this, she turned around. She saw Jesus standing there, but she didn't realize it was Jesus. Now, I don't know if he looked different or if she was just stricken with grief or thrown off, but she was not expecting to see him. Now, I meet people in public. Maybe I'm not in my work clothes, Maybe I have on a baseball hat, and they don't know who I am because I'm out of context. Maybe it's just on a camera that they've seen me, or in the church before them preaching. But when they see me out there, often I have to take off my hat. If I have on sunglasses, take them off and make sure they can see my face and go, yeah, it's me. Jesus was so out of context. He was whole and he was present. And he asked her the same question the angels asked, but then added a leading question. Verse 15, he asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've put him, and I will get him. The one person that really knew her, the one person who really saw her, the one person she could rely on. He was dead, and she wasn't even able to take care of his body. All she wants is to be with Jesus, even a dead Jesus. But it was time for Mary to again find herself at the intersection of the transcendent and the intimate. At this intersection of the miraculous and the personal, at the intersection of the intimate and the powerful. And maybe today is a time for you to find yourself at the same crossroads. Maybe here on this Easter or whenever it is that you've watched this. Maybe you've heard the story of the resurrection. Maybe it's common to you. Maybe it's outdated to you. Maybe it's just tradition. Maybe it's what you're banking your everything on. But at that crucial intersection of the immanent and the transcendent, this is what happens. John 20:16, Jesus said to her, Mary. He did something that every person on the planet responds to. He said something that every person on the planet responds to, and that is their name spoken by one who loves them. I'm amazed when this happens. You can be in a room full of people and a mother can call to a child. A husband can lovingly call to his wife, or wife to a husband. A friend at a crowded game can say something to another friend. And those being called hear. The one who loves them has called them and they can hear it. Many of us have been that lost child in a mall or a theme park before, right? And you find yourself panicking and crying and thinking that you'll never see your parents again. And finally, you hear your name from the one who loves you, who knows you, who can rescue you from being lost. Now, Mary was in a panic. We already know that she was crying. We already know that she was confused because she didn't recognize Jesus. We already know that she feels like her life has been turned upside down. She has no idea what she's going to do next. She had banked everything on Jesus. Before Jesus said her name, she was frantically looking in every direction. But at the sound of her name, this is what she did. She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. Once again, she was faced with what we're all faced with at Easter, to believe the impossible, the transcendent. That the God of the universe steps into time and space and does something miraculous, does something so powerful, calls us by name. Because we all want the immanent. We all want to be seen. We want to be known. We all desire to be accepted for who we are. We all live in a culture today that has a heightened sense of that desire. People are running to the farthest extremes of who they feel like they are, and encouraged unapologetically to become the best versions of themselves, not to care what anyone else says, because the highest virtue today is be your authentic self. The underlying promise of this encouragement is the promise of peace. However, people today that are trying to find their truest, best versions of themselves are experiencing depression at the highest rates ever. Anxiety is off the charts. And I think deep down, right, we all know to be true, right? We all really want is not to be the best versions of ourselves, but what we want is to be accepted and loved. We want somebody who sees us. We want the immanent. Now, we can't have the fullness of that experience of being known and loved and accepted without the resurrection. Here's what I mean. See, every single one of us knows what is deep down in our hearts. We long to be seen, but we know that there are things in our past, in our minds, in the deep, dark corners of our heart that we don't want anyone to see. We all want to be around authentic people, but we don't want them to be too authentic because we know that in the dark corners of their mind, if we could see that, man, we'd cancel them, we'd run from them, we would get some distance from them. That's because this is what the Bible calls sin. They are the things inside all of us that cause us to rebel against God's good standard and at the same time trying to be God. And it can lead to some pretty dark places and some pretty dark thoughts. Paul, the guy who wrote much of the New Testament, says this about resurrection and sin. He says, if the dead are not raised, then Christ has not been raised either. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile and you're still in your sins. And this is the issue. Without the resurrection, right? The sins are never dealt with, never paid for, never fully seen, never forgiven. They remain roaming and controlling in the back of our minds and in the depths of our heart. But through Jesus' death and resurrection, we know that Jesus saw those places that we don't want anyone to see. He saw them from his throne, and instead of saying, oh, not that again, I wish they would try harder. I wish you would stop it. I wish they would be the best versions of themselves. Instead of making us figure it out on our own, he stepped down from his throne. He mounted a donkey. He rode into Jerusalem, knowing he would end up on the cross and be killed for us. And if the God of the universe knows you, sees you, died for you, defeated death for you, and calls you by name, then we can actually be our authentic self. We don't have to hide because we've already been seen and known and loved. Without the resurrection, there is no Christianity. There are only people trying to run around and just show enough of themselves to seem authentic, but hiding all the sins they hope no one finds out about, or parading their sins and hoping for acceptance and love. It makes no sense on one level that the God of the universe would know my name, yet still call it. But that is what he did with Mary and millions of people since. And he gave Mary an assignment, I believe, uniquely fit for her. Jesus said, don't hold on to me, for I have not ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I'm ascending to my Father and to your Father, to my God and your God. She was to go and tell others. She was to be the first evangelist. She was even called by some the apostle to the apostles because she was commissioned to share not the improbable, but the impossible, that Jesus was alive. She had been freed from spiritual oppression that had completely taken over her life. She, maybe more than most of the disciples, was the miracle. She was the miracle. She didn't observe it. She was it. She was delivered herself from darkness and the demonic. Jesus called Mary's name. Jesus saw her, the real her. He loved her. He accepted her. He saved her. And he commissioned her. What about you? What about you? You're seen, you're known. And not only that, you've been created by the one who loves you. As he sees you, he sees more than you want him to see. He knows every dark corner of your heart, every evil thought in your mind. And those things didn't drive him from you. They pulled at his heart and pulled him towards you. And from his throne, he saw that there was nothing that we could do to get to him. In some ways, just like Mary, who was controlled by 7 demons, we're controlled by our insecurities, by our anxieties, by our sins, by our lusts, by our desires. And with love in his eyes, Jesus walked straight to the cross to die an excruciating death, a death we earned. Those sins in our life are not just things that God doesn't like. They're the things that would keep us apart from God forever. They're the things that prevent the imminent. They're the things that require the transcendent. When Jesus died on the cross, it wasn't just as a good example of sacrifice and leadership. It was to pay the penalty for what we earned. Without his death, we could not know God. And without resurrection, he would still have been dead without accomplishing anything. But because of the resurrection, he's come near to you. And while we, just like Mary, are frantically looking every which way to find purpose, to find life, to find whatever we're looking for, Jesus calls you by name. Will you respond? Will you respond? Too many people today have dismissed the possibility of the transcendent, and in doing so, the immanent love of God. They have, in effect, turned off the possibility in their thinking of the transcendent, of the miraculous. They're traveling through life with their phone on flight mode and surprised they don't have any cell coverage. They're surprised there is no signal. We all know this symbol. You turn off your phone's ability to receive, and so many people have done that. So let me encourage you, turn off the flight mode of your life. Open your head and your heart to God's transcendence and welcome his immanence. Listen for his voice. The resurrection declares that there is a God who transcended into time and space, who seeks us, who desires us, desires to heal us, to free us, to save us, who knows us and loves us. And he is so personal that he calls us by name. Do you hear him? If you do, do not put him off. Respond to him. On this Easter, we celebrate resurrection. We celebrate what Mary discovered over and over again in her life. There's a God who knows her and loves her and wants to be with her. He wants to be with you too. I pray that you would trust him today. And I'd like to lead you in just a little prayer. On this Easter Sunday, if you want to trust Christ, just tell him so in prayer. And by an act of your will, transfer your trust from yourself to him. Pray this with me. Jesus, thank you for dying on the cross for me. I believe that your death was for my sin. Thank you for rising from the dead to give me life. Thank you for forgiving me. Today, with all I know about you, I trust you. All I know about me, I yield to you. And I thank you that you love me and that you'll forgive me. So today, I declare my trust in you. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, thanks for praying that with me. And so many times we encourage people to say yes to following Jesus, to put their trust in him. So if you have any questions about following Jesus, please go to our website, thechapelbr.com/yes for information, or just email us at connect@thechapelbr.com. Happy Easter, and God bless you.